My name is Alfred Meyer. For 32 years, 4 months, and 11 days, I have lived in the shadow of other people's words. My office, if you could call this damp, subterranean vault an office, is located exactly 4 meters beneath the bustling pavement of Berlin's central post office. Up there, the world is governed by the sun and the ticking of the great station clock. Down here, time is measured in layers of dust and the steady, rhythmic thud of a rubber stamp hitting a pad of violet ink. They call this the dead letter office. It is a graveyard for messages that lost their way. In the official manuals of the Reichspost, and later the Bundespost, I am listed as a senior clerk of non-deliverable correspondence. But in my own mind, I have always been a cartographer of the forgotten. I am the man who must know where everyone is, even when they have disappeared from the face of the earth. Let us start with the smell. People who don't work with paper think it all smells the same. They are wrong. A letter from a wealthy merchant in Charlottenburg smells of expensive linen, cedarwood, and perhaps a faint hint of high-grade tobacco. A letter from a factory worker in Wedding smells of sweat, cheap coal smoke, and desperation. By 1934, I could identify the district of origin simply by pressing a stack of envelopes to my nose. It was a useless skill to anyone but me. But in this basement, useless skills are the only things that keep the walls from closing in. It is a Tuesday morning in October 1934. The light from my single desk lamp is a pale, sickly yellow. Before me lies a mountain of unreachables. This is the harvest of the weekend. 42 envelopes that the regular postmen, in their stiff uniforms and polished boots, could not deliver. They gave up. They saw a smeared name or a non-existent street number, and they stamped it, address unknown. They brought them to me because they know I have a memory like a spider's web. I pick up the first envelope. It is grey and rough to the touch. The handwriting is a chaotic scrawl, the work of someone whose hand was either shaking from age or from a profound lack of education. The address says, "To the baker with the limp, near the old clock tower." A younger clerk would laugh. He would toss it into the incinerator bin without a second thought. But I close my eyes. I let my mind drift away from the damp walls of the basement. I am walking now. I am walking through the North District. I see the clock tower, the one with the copper roof that turned green in the rain of 1922. I turn left. There are 3 bakeries within a 5-minute walk of that tower. I remember the first, Schmidt's. No, Schmidt is a young man, a veteran of the sports clubs. His legs are strong. The second, Muller's. Muller is a woman, a widow who took over the business in 1919. Then there is the third, a tiny shop tucked into an alleyway that doesn't even have a name on the official city maps. The baker there is old Hans. I remember seeing him in 1925, leaning against his flour sacks. He took a piece of shrapnel in the thigh at the Somme. He limps. I open my ledger, a massive leather-bound book that contains the secret history of Berlin. I find Hans. His real name is Johannes Kiedrich. I dip my steel-nibbed pen into the inkwell. The scratching sound of the nib against the paper is the only music I need. I write the correct address on the envelope in a neat, copperplate script. One soul reconnected, one ghost brought back to life. In these early years, the work was a puzzle. It was a game of logic. I studied the evolution of ink. Did you know that between 1930 and 1935, the chemical composition of standard blue ink changed 3 times? If a letter has been caught in the rain, the way the ink bleeds tells me how old it is. If the blue turns a faint shade of pink at the edges, it's the cheap ink sold in the kiosks near the railway stations. If it stays a stubborn, dark indigo, it's the expensive stuff from the department stores. I have a lamp on my desk, a specialized tool with a heavy glass lens. When an address is rismuto, washed away, I don't despair. I place the paper under the warmth of the bulb. I hold it at a 30-degree angle. You see, a pen doesn't just lay down color. It wounds the paper. It crushes the delicate fibers of the wood pulp. Under the right light, those crushed fibers cast tiny, microscopic shadows. I don't read the words anymore. I read the scars. But then, the world began to tilt. By 1938, The letters started to change. The polite inquiries about health and the price of grain were replaced by something sharper. Panic began to leak through the envelopes. I started seeing letters addressed to people who had lived in the same apartment for 40 years, only to find the new postman's note. Relocated, destination unknown. I knew where they were going, or at least, I suspected. My maps grew dark. I started keeping a private drawer. I didn't tell my supervisors. I called it the Archive of the Displaced. When a letter came for a family that had been relocated, I didn't send it to the fire. I kept it. I thought, perhaps, one day, the world would stop screaming and someone would come back to ask if their mother had ever written. Then came the war. The basement became a bunker. The sounds from above changed from the clicking of heels to the heavy, rhythmic thud of jackboots, and eventually to the terrifying whistle of the sirens. 1943. 1944. The air in my office became thick with the smell of burning. Not the burning of coal, but the burning of a city. The mail became field post, the Feldpost triangles. These were the most difficult. They were written in trenches, in frozen dugouts, in the back of rattling trucks. The graphite of the pencils was faint. The paper was often nothing more than a scrap of a ration book. One evening, during a particularly heavy raid, the lights went out. I sat in the darkness, surrounded by 10,000 undelivered messages. I realized then that I wasn't just a clerk. I was a witness. I reached out and touched a stack of letters. They were warm from the friction of the sorting machines above. I felt the pulse of 1 million people, all trying to say the same thing. I am still here. Do not forget me. The most heartbreaking letters were the ones addressed to the house with the green gate or the apartment above the cinema. Because I knew, with the cold precision of a man who studies maps, that the house with the green gate had been turned into a crater on a Tuesday night in April. I would hold these letters in my hand and feel the weight of a dead world. To stamp them undeliverable felt like a second killing. I remember one letter specifically, from 1945. It was from a child. The address was simply, "To Papa," at the front. There was no name, no unit number, just a drawing of a dog on the back of the envelope. I sat with that letter for 3 days. I looked through the casualty lists, the prisoner of war records, the hospital transfers. There were 10,000 papas at the front, and yet I couldn't throw it away. I put it in my private drawer. It is still there, I suspect. A message frozen in time, waiting for a father who would never return to a child who would never forget. After the war, the silence was the loudest thing of all. For months, no new mail came. Then, slowly, the trickle returned. But the Berlin I knew, my mental map, was gone. The landmarks had been pulverized. The clock tower was a stump. The baker with the limp was nowhere to be found. I had to learn the city again, street by shattered street. I walked through the ruins on my lunch breaks, taking notes on who was living in which cellar, which ruins had been turned into makeshift shelters. My ledger became a map of a ghost city. By 1952, the world was trying to be modern. They painted the walls of the post office a bright antiseptic white. They gave me a new desk made of steel instead of oak. It felt cold. The smell of the basement changed. The scent of old glue and history was replaced by the smell of floor wax and ozone. Then came the machines. 1956, the sorter. It was a monstrous piece of engineering, a wall of clicking relays and spinning rollers. It could process 1,000 letters in the time it took me to sharpen my pencil. The young men who operated it wore white laboratory coats. They didn't look like postal workers. They looked like doctors. They looked at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. To them, I was a ghost, a relic of a slow, inefficient past. "Alfred," they would say, "why do you spend 20 minutes staring at a single envelope? The sorter has already rejected it. It's a bad address. Move on." How could I explain it to them? The sorter sees a series of ink marks that do not match its programmed logic. It sees an error. But I see a grandmother in Munich whose eyesight is failing, causing her to write the house number 8 so it looks like a zero. I see the hesitation in a young man's hand as he writes to a girl he hasn't seen since the borders were closed. A hesitation that causes a smudge over the street name. The sorter has no room for hesitation. It has no room for the failing eyes of the old. It demands perfection in a world that is fundamentally broken. I remember a day in 1958. A letter was spat out by the machine. It was marked Error 404, Non-Existent Route. I picked it up. It was a letter from a son in West Berlin to his mother in the East. The street existed, but the bridge between them had been closed. To the machine, the address was dead because the path was blocked. I took the letter home. I didn't tell anyone. I spent weeks finding a way. A contact in a different sorting office. A friend who knew a man who drove a delivery truck across the line. I didn't do it for the state. I didn't do it for the post office. I did it because that letter was a physical piece of a human soul, and it deserved to arrive. Finally, we come to 1960. My final year. The basement is now filled with the hum of electronics. My dead letter office has been officially renamed the Centralized Exception Handling Unit. It sounds like something out of a science fiction novel. On my very last day, I decided to do one final sweep of the office. Not the new steel cabinets, but the old forgotten corners behind the heavy radiators, the places the cleaners never reached. I pushed a long wooden ruler into the gap between the wall and the heating pipes. I felt something, a resistance. I pulled, and out came a single yellowed envelope. It was thick with the dust of 2 decades. I wiped away the grime. The stamp was from 1939. It was a beautiful, deep red stamp. The address was for me. My hands shook. I haven't received a personal letter in 15 years. I sat down at my steel desk, under the flickering fluorescent lights, and I used my silver letter opener, the one given to me on my 10th anniversary of service, to slice the top of the envelope. It was from Carl. He was my best friend in the years before the madness began. We used to sit in the Tiergarten and argue about poetry and the future of architecture. The letter was dated August 28, 1939, 3 days before the world ended. Dear Alfred, it read, I have found a small cafe near the river. They serve the kind of coffee you like, the bitter kind that smells like burnt earth. I will be there on Friday evening at 7. Don't be late, old friend. I've saved you a seat at the corner table. We have much to discuss. I sat there for a long time. The Friday evening Carl mentioned was 21 years ago. Carl never made it to that cafe. He died in the first winter in Russia. I knew this because I had seen his name on a casualty list in 1942. I had even held a letter addressed to him in 1943 and had been forced to stamp it deceased. But for a moment, in the silence of that basement, the letter was new. The ink was fresh. Carl was waiting for me at a corner table with a cup of bitter coffee. I realized then that this was the true nature of my life's work. I was not just delivering mail. I was guarding the hope that someone, somewhere, was waiting. Even if the wait lasted 20 years. Even if the person waiting was no longer among the living. I stood up. I put on my heavy wool coat. It was a warm day in 1960, but I felt a chill that no sun could ever warm. I took my ledger, the old one, the one with the handwritten maps, and I placed it in the center of my desk. Let the young men in white coats find it. Let them see what it looks like to truly know a city. I walked up the stone stairs for the last time. I emerged into the bright, noisy world of the new Berlin. There were cars everywhere now, the little Volkswagens and the elegant Mercedes. People were rushing, their eyes fixed on the ground, their pockets filled with coins for the telephone booths. They think they are connected. They think that because they can pick up a receiver and hear a voice from 100 miles away, they are no longer alone. But they don't understand the sanctity of the letter. They don't understand the weight of a thought that has been carved into paper, placed in an envelope, and entrusted to the world. I walked toward the river. I found the spot where the cafe used to be. It was a parking lot now, but I sat on a low stone wall and I looked at the water. I am a man of the past. I am a man of ink and dust. But as I watched the sunset over the rebuilt skyline, I felt a strange sense of peace. I knew the addresses of 10,000 homes that no longer exist. I knew the names of a generation that has been turned to ash. I have carried their secrets in my pockets for 30 years. The mail has been delivered. The ghosts have been heard. And now, finally, I am going home.